and knowing Ave Maria students, it makes me feel much more comfortable. But I'm really pleased to be here today and realize that this is a very big topic. So what I will do, I'm just going to, as Jonathan said, I'm going to start out by just sort of giving an outline of love, of spousal love, of falling in love, and just cover some points. Also, I'll talk a little bit about the counterfeit of falling in love, which I think should be of interest to a lot of you. And then I'm going to count on your questions for really helping along the substance of this evening's conversation, because questions always, I think, they help the speaker focus on what is of interest to the audience. So, and thanks a lot for putting on your cameras, because I'm just going to go around and pin some of you on as I speak, and it's very helpful for me to see some faces. So thank you for doing that. And of course, you just feel free if you aren't comfortable turning on your camera as well. That goes without saying. So Jonathan, thank you so much for organizing this. And I know it was some work, and for your support in all of this. So I'm going to be looking down at my notes sometimes. All right, that's why if I'm not looking at the camera. Okay, so I am of the conviction that spousal love and being in love are great gifts, and I'm of the conviction that they come from God. And it's something that I can't prove absolutely, but I am convinced of it nevertheless. And there are important thinkers who have said that all love comes from God, including Soren Kierkegaard. You may have heard of him, a 19th century thinker, and St. John. I know that's Revelation, but still he tells us that God is love. And in this consists love, not that we have loved God, but that he has loved us first. So, and I also think that spousal love and falling in love are tremendous gifts. I know that falling in love is sometimes poo-pooed. And in part, it's because there are counterfeits of falling in love. And because the emotional sphere is subject to so much superficiality, to so much error, to so much sin. But I don't believe in throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think that there are genuine emotions that are extremely deep, extremely important, and are very much a part of God's plan, and that God uses the emotions in a very important way when it comes to matchmaking. So that's what I would like to do, is talk a little bit about especially the experience of falling in love. And maybe what I'll do is first just kind of give a general picture of the relationship between falling in love and spousal love. So I think that falling in love is the initial stage of spousal love. It's the place where God first shows up. He first shows his presence in matchmaking, in bringing two persons together. And he does this by touching the hearts of the two people concerned, of the man and woman concerned. Falling in love, I think, happens very, very deep within the soul. In fact, it happens in a place within our being that's too deep for us to see and too deep for us to actually experience. Okay, its location is very deep within us, and we don't really see into that deep place, just as we don't see God's activity. But then the love pushes up, so to speak, and manifests itself in various ways within us. And first and foremost, in the heart, in the affective sphere. Philosophers use the word affectivity for the emotions. Okay, this is where we are moved in the depth of our being. And how does that happen? Well, God unveils the beauty of the other person. We're touched by this mysterious, irrepeatable, individual mystery of the other, and it reaches by a gift of God into the depth of our soul. Okay, and in some way we can say what happens what is love? If I were to give a kind of cheat sheet definition, I would say it's being all about the other. Suddenly our life shifts from revolving around ourselves to revolving around the other. That center within us is replaced by another person. We are ejected from within ourselves, and the other person occupies center stage. They become enthroned, so to speak, and our life becomes about them. And the initial phases of this happens in falling in love. Okay, and now just to briefly say what happens with falling in love? Falling in love is meant to ripen and mature into, we can say, a full-blown spousal love. When this falling in love is pursued in courtship and in marriage, it's eventually supposed to become something that is no longer happening simply by the activity of God, but that now we are supposed to join in, you could say, the upbuilding and the continuation of that love. Now, I like to, I think an analogy would make it clear. If you take something like fire, we can never make a fire, can we? It's kind of interesting that we can create the conditions for fire, but we can't actually create fire. Now, once the fire has been given to us as a gift, when we realize its conditions, it burns, but on the condition that we feed it. We have to put in logs and we have to make sure that the fire has sufficient oxygen. So the gift of love, which God initiates, and in those early stages, he seems to be the sole operator. We seem to be overcome by love. We're carried by it. It's meant to be that way. God is giving us 100% for free. He's doing all the work. Okay, but eventually what happens is he wants this to become the spouse's or the couple's own love in a much fuller and realer way. And this, of course, happens in the commitment of each person to the other, as each person lives for the other, performs selfless acts of love and sacrifice and so forth. And what's meant to happen is God's supposed to withdraw his activity slowly, gradually, and that's no problem. The falling in love phase does eventually pass, and it grows into, you could say, this burning furnace of love, which has its life in part from God, from the influx, the gift of his love, and the spouse is contributing with their free acts. There's the analogy again. Fire is something we could never create, and yet we can feed it. So it's very beautiful to think of this cooperation, this conjunction of God's activity and the human soul. Okay, so now, having said all of that, love is something which is fraught with difficulties and dangers in the fallen world. It's important for us to think about the pure essence of love, but we also have to acknowledge that just like almost anything in human affairs, it is fallen. It's been wounded by original sin. But before I go on to talk about some of the difficulties, I want to give you another analogy. All right, things can be fallen in two different ways. We could take the example of a limb that's deformed. Okay, if somebody has a deformed limb, the best they can do is learn how to compensate for it, learn how to walk as smoothly as possible. Let's say it's a deformed leg, but the deformation can't be undone except by a miracle, right? The deformation is there. But I don't think that love has been wounded by sin in that way. I think the better analogy is to think of silver that tarnishes. Okay, now silver is an incredibly beautiful metal, but unless we continuously polish it, it becomes caked over with tarnish. All right, but if we continue to polish it, there's something intact under there, bright and beautiful, and to be had for the taking, so to speak. And I think that human love is like this. Okay, we have to continuously work at keeping straight the paths of love. But underneath, there's a precious gift that does have something in common with eternity. Kierkegaard speaks of love as being the only thing that's homogeneous between eternity and this life, between the next life and this life. Homogeneous means of a piece, of one piece, being completely in common. Okay, and I think that that's true, that love really does contain the quality of the eternal. Okay, even in a fallen world, and it can that beauty and perfection of love can be accessed, even though it takes work, of course. But it's still deep, it's still powerful, and it's still purely of God. Okay, and as we know, it's the coin of the realm in heaven. Okay, but we can already trade with heaven by using this coin already here in this life. Okay, and one of the very precious kinds of love that's given to us is spousal love and falling in love. Okay, so now, especially when it comes to falling in love and spousal love. So I said earlier that the reality of love is given to us in a very deep part of our being, and then it can come out in various different faculties. You guys are all Ave Maria students, so you know what a faculty is, right? The will, the heart, and the intellect are considered faculties of the human person. Okay, and sometimes people say, oh, is love an act of the will? Is love an emotion? What is it? And I will say it's everything, okay? And in this life, we sometimes feel a separation among the faculties. And it's the same thing in love, all right? Sometimes our heart is bursting with love. And sometimes the heart recedes into the background and has to pass the baton on to our freedom, to our will, all right? And we have to continue with our commitments even though our heart is not filled up with love. Okay, but there's no problem with that, right? We're used to that in every area of our life. I don't think we have to choose between the will and the heart. Still, I think the heart is a very privileged locus. It's a special locus of love, all right? The heart carries, it provides, you could say, the warmth of love, the intimacy of love, the beatitude of love. All of these things that are so central to love are found in the emotions, are found in the heart. Okay, and the love is sort of the infrastructure that holds everything together if the heart fails sometimes, right? Okay, but we could say that the heart is like the flesh and the blood of love. And of course, why am I saying all of that? Well, I think that we have to take that seriously, especially when it comes to marriage and discerning marriage and courtship and so on. Please don't choose your significant other on the basis of a list of things that you have put together, okay, as a Catholic. No. Now, those things might be conditions. Of course, there could be things in another person that makes them incapable of entering into marriage. Of course, we take that for granted. But the matchmaking is done in the hearts of the persons, first and foremost. Okay, so the heart plays a very important role when God first is bringing a man and a woman together. And falling in love is the specific experience where he draws two persons together in this way. And he invites them, possibly invites them into a courtship and into marriage. Now, later on, we're going to say a little something about counterfeits. And I can't go into it here, but of course, there are situations where, for reasons unknown to us, he causes the experience of falling in love that is not meant to be consummated in courtship. It's not meant to be fulfilled or completed in courtship and in marriage. And I think I won't talk about that now because we simply can't cover everything, but I think we have to acknowledge that there are cases like that, and they play a mysterious role in God's plan, but we have to let him do what he sees fit, even if we don't understand it. Okay, and then what we are going to look at today, though, is counterfeits of falling in love. Okay, so before I turn to the counterfeits, I have a little section that it's called Trouble in Paradise. Okay, the way in which our fallen condition can give rise to difficulties in the experience of spousal love, especially. It can show up in all love relationships, but in a very special way, our fallen state gives rise to difficulties in this closest of human love relationships. Okay, so to begin with, we have to kind of give a brief, I have to talk about a very important element of love. Love arises in us as a response to the beauty of the beloved. I don't think any of you are going to be surprised to hear that as being absolutely foundational to love, right? I encounter the beauty of the beloved. The beauty is unveiled to me in a special way. And on the basis of this revelation, I feel invited, I am invited to celebrate the beauty of the other, to say it's good that you exist. And I'm invited now to make my life revolve around the other as a response to their beauty, as a response to their preciousness. Okay. I think that's clear. If that's not present, then whatever's happening, it's not love. But of course, there's another dimension to love, which is as conspicuous, okay, which is a tremendous, you could say, happiness that floods the soul of the lover, a kind of new life that the lover experiences in his soul. Okay, this is a kind of a promise also of tremendous fulfillment occurs. And people often talk about that. You know, I really found myself in my relationship with you. I understood who I really was in my relationship with you. Okay, and of course the happiness is very obvious. Okay, so, but we have to understand that while the happiness, the fulfillment, the experience of coming to life and all of this is a result of the relationship, it's quite a different dimension from the first dimension that I mentioned, right? Can you see that? And it's kind of funny that they're so inextricable. They go absolutely together. The happiness is the happiness that flows into our soul because of the beauty of the other, right? Because they have been entrusted to us and unveiled to us. Okay, the tremendous healing that can take place in our souls comes from the other. It's because of the other. And yet these are two very different dimensions of love. Okay, now before I go on to talk about some of the trouble, I want to point out that the presence of both of these gives spousal love its very unique quality. All right, the experiencing our inner being suffused by the love of the other, by the beauty of the other person and the happiness that's present is very central to spousal love. It gives it its kind of unique quality and its unique cast. Now I'm leaving aside so much, of course, because this has to include, of course, the mystery of femininity and masculinity. Part of what touches the soul, the soul of the man, is the mystery of femininity in its individual manifestation. Okay, not femininity as such, but femininity, the femininity of Jane. All right, or I don't know if there are any Janes here, but anyway, okay. And the same thing happens in the soul of the woman, the mystery of masculinity in the personification, the concrete personification of this man reaches the soul of the woman in a way that another feminine beauty never could. Okay, so this also gives spousal love its very specific quality. Okay, now, all right, where can trouble arise? Where can things become complicated in the relationship, in the falling in love phase already, and especially as the relationship develops and continues? All right, it can happen especially because of the second element. And it's because of the following. Spousal love occurs very deep within the person, okay? Our deepest center is touched by the other person, and our deepest center is awakened and mobilized and active, so to speak, in responding to the other person. All right, that's not a surprise. It's the deepest self that's involved. Okay. All right, so far so good. But there's something going on in the depth of the soul that gives rise to complications, and it's the following. It's in that very, very deep place where we are knitted together that we find not only our selfhood, but we also find the wounds that have, in a sense, become incorporated into our deepest self. When we were being created, so to speak, by our parents in the family of origin, okay? So I know that a number of you have taken my philosophy of love class, but not everybody has. So let me just briefly explain what I'm talking about, okay? When God creates us, he starts the process, but he hands the baton over to the human parents. Human parents are true co-creators of our being. And it is our parents' love that gives us to ourself. All right. So it's through my mother and my father looking at me, seeing me, and saying to me, "You are precious. I'm so happy that you exist," that I awaken to my own goodness. Okay. I hope that everybody can see that. I'm really abbreviating this. Okay. But we can't discover ourselves. I'll give you the analogy that I usually use. With our eyes, we see the world. Okay, and with my eye, use the letter I, all right, I face the world, okay? Now, can I see my eyes? Even though the eyes are that with which I see, it's kind of funny, I can't see my eyes. I have to have someone describe them to me, or better yet, put a mirror up, okay? And because my eyes are reflected back to me, I can see them, all right? Now, the capital I is also, we can discover ourselves and see ourselves only in the loving gaze or in the gaze of another, okay? And God meant for us to be loved into our selfhood. God meant us to receive ourselves as perfectly celebrated, as perfectly affirmed, as feeling perfectly worthwhile. It's good that I exist. We should be able to say that. But in fact, because we are children of fallen parents, that wasn't always done to perfection. And we have wounds within us where we find or experience ourselves as not being good, as not being worthwhile, as feeling a thirst for love that was not fulfilled by the family of origin, okay? All right, this happens, as you can, I'm sure, perceive, in a very, very deep part of our being. Well, it's the part of our being that is awakened and mobilized in spousal love as well. Okay, so our deepest self enters into the equation of spousal love. So do those wounds. They become in some way activated. Okay, they become active or actual. It's like they emerge from hiding. They may have been kept under wraps or something, but now they emerge. Okay, and why is that? Well, there's something that God ordained to be the case. The love of the spouse is meant to be healing. Spousal love is meant to be healing. Any kind of love is meant to be healing. But because spousal love reaches into our depth, it has a special capacity and potential for healing love. Okay, and it would be a very big topic as to whether that can be done perfectly by the spouse. I have my doubts. But a lot of healing does take place. Okay. All right. So, and that's fine. Okay. But the problem happens is when we shift from receiving the healing to demanding the healing. Okay. Let me explain that a little bit. Okay. When we love another person, we are loving out of our, you could say, pure selfhood. All right. But when we experience the pain of being unaffirmed, that pain can begin to take center stage. And our self is kind of knocked off to the side. And we can begin to relate to the other person out of the wound, out of the need. All right. Now, let's just take pain by itself, the experience of pain by itself. What is the knee-jerk reaction that arises? What is the movement to which pain gives? Well, automatically it seeks relief, right? If you leave pain by itself, so to speak, it's unbearable, okay? So the knee-jerk reaction is to seek relief. So look what happens when I shift, when I allow that wound to take center stage in relation to the person, could say my beloved, where there's this promise of healing. Suddenly the beloved becomes a tool or an instrument for that healing. and no longer, you could say, somebody who is approached as an end in himself. Okay, again, I know that's philosophical language, but Ave Maria students can handle it. Okay, the other person becomes an object. Okay. All right. So now, in the case of a genuine love, all right, these wounds and the dynamic of these wounds can become mixed into their relationship. All right. What I'd like to do is give you a concrete example, all right, to illustrate this. Let's take someone who is already married and take a husband and wife. The husband comes home from work. Okay, this is a little bit cliched, but who cares? Okay, a husband comes home from work. He greets his wife and he plops down to watch a sports game on television. Now, this is painful to the wife. All right, she feels ignored. Now, I'm going to put this in terms of ABC. There are three things that we can discern here. A, the wife first has to discern whether her pain is straightforward. What do I mean by that? All right, a straightforward suffering in the face of that pain, in the face of this situation, would be that she has been thinking about her husband, let's say for hours, anticipating being in his presence, right? Responding in her mind to his preciousness and his mystery. She loves him, his uniqueness. She thinks about his qualities, his characteristics. She longs for union with him. And of course, he is not present to her. Okay, now this is going to be painful, right? And it's in a sense, a beautiful kind of suffering, right? It happens on the background of her response to his preciousness. All right. But B, she has to discern whether that's what's going on or whether something else is going on. Is it possible that his absence is evoking, bringing to the surface, the pain of deprivation that she experienced maybe in her infancy and in her childhood? Okay, can you see how these two pains could get mixed together? See that? And all right, so then there's C. Then what can happen? So far, so good. No problem. All right, either way. It doesn't matter which suffering is there. It doesn't matter if both are there. It doesn't matter if the second kind predominates even, okay? Or is the only one there. All right, what is very important at this moment? The wife is faced with a challenge. All right, is she going to move into anger, which is a very, very typical move to make? Right? So notice that the husband's behavior is not what's making her angry. Right? His behavior might be causing her pain or evoking pain. Her anger comes on top of that pain that she's suffering. It's something separate, something distinct. Okay. Now, her anger, you know what her anger reveals? It reveals that she is relating to her need in a self-centered way. She has allowed it to dominate the relationship. It means that she has moved into demanding what she needs from her spouse. And at that moment, she's moved into using her spouse. Okay, so now you're getting the picture, all right? Now, let me tell you how to untie these knots, okay? Because it's not quite the point of what we're doing here, and I have to limit myself to what I do. But how then should she deal with this? Okay, so first of all, she has to step out of the dynamism of that need that's giving rise to that knee-jerk wanting to get from her husband what she needs, and she has to let go of her anger, okay? But if she does that, that means she has to move into the suffering. She has to move into the pain. All right, and then if she's able to, she should try to discern whether this is a here and now suffering in response to her beloved, or whether this is an old suffering coming up. And the key, though, is that she should go to her husband and ask him to fill the need that is either present or is, you could say, evoked from the past. All right, honey, I have been thinking about you all day. It's so painful for me that you sat down and watched television. I would love to have your presence at this moment. In fact, I need your presence. She might even say, I feel my inner child clamoring for presence. Okay? And something has essentially changed in this relationship. What has originally might have threatened to be a relationship of use has now become an expression of love. Through respecting the freedom of her husband and acknowledging that he has something to give. This is a way, notice, a way of loving. Okay, we tend to limit love to doing nice things for the other, making them feel affirmed by our warm emotional response and so forth. In a fallen world, there are many times when we can't do that, and we have to find out that there are secret and hidden ways of loving that we don't expect, unexpected ways of loving that are nevertheless very deep and very beautiful. This is a way for her to express her love, refusing to become angry in the face of her feeling of being neglected, and coming to him with a request. Okay, and just to finish this up, of course, he may be able to give that love that she needs and that presence that she needs, or he himself may not be able to in that moment, and she has to be okay with that. And that, of course, is difficult. It means embracing the suffering and take my philosophy of love to know where to go with that next. Okay, but that's an example to show you that I think will help you guys relate to what I'm talking about. Okay, this can happen in many, many, many situations. I just gave you one concrete one. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is the need for love in human life will outweigh the ability of people to give love. Uh-oh. The deficit is greater than the supply. All right, you know about that supply and demand. The demand is greater than the supply. Well, that's only at first sight. If we become creative with loving, if we become attentive to seeing the various ways in which love can express itself, we'll find that in seeming situations of deprivation and of emptiness, love can be reintroduced into the situation. And I just gave you just one tiny example, the willingness to embrace our suffering when the other is not able to give love, and refusing to be angry is a way of loving them. Okay, and I explained in my philosophy of love class recently that two people can still be together in their emptiness. All right, the image I give is if you are in a cave and suddenly the lights go out, and one person says, do you have a flashlight? And the other says, no. Do you? And the other says, no. All right, if they hold hands, everything changes. They're still in the dark, but now they're together. All right, and love is ultimately about union. Not union in this or that way. Sometimes people can be united in a full overflow of their hearts. Sometimes they can be together in dryness. All right, but on a deeper level, they have reunited in that moment. Okay, so now let's quickly go. Let's see, I've been talking for 35 minutes. I still have a little time, Jonathan. Can I go on a little bit more? Okay, so now what I'll do is shift to considering counterfeits. Counterfeit now now let's talk about falling in love, okay? Now here's the thing, of course, about a counterfeit. The counterfeit is like the original, which means very often by looking at it directly, it's difficult to discern the difference. It takes a lot of very close scrutiny. And as I say, I'm really sorry that they rhyme, but we have to learn the art of reading our heart. Okay, and I think anybody who's seeking to live to grow in the moral life, all right, will always be kind of examining their interior life, their emotions, trying to see which ones are superficial, which ones are real, which ones are selfish, which ones are selfless, and so forth. Okay, and the same thing is going to have to be the case in our love lives. Okay, some people fall in love once and have no problems, and they get married and live happily ever after, okay? But it's not uncommon for people to experience falling in love more than once and to experience counterfeits, okay? So, and actually I've already laid the foundation for understanding what a counterfeit is. Now, there's something strange, I think, that we can't fully explain, but for whatever reason, in the case of a person of the opposite gender, these wounds from the past can awaken, and they can kind of see in a relationship a promise of healing without that other dimension of love, which is the main one, which is being touched by the beauty of the beloved. Don't ask me why it happens, kind of strange. But that second element of love, a kind of a promise of healing and the filling of needs, gets awakened and gets evoked. Okay, this is one form that a counterfeit can take on, and it's one that I know that I experienced in my life at least once, and that I have encountered, in my friends and other people. So this is the one that I want to talk about. But now we understand, at least in part, why that happens. Okay, that that the experience of the possibility of healing is extremely deep and exists in the same place that falling in love exists, and the experience of the spousal love of another. All right, those two happen in the center, or exist in the center of the being, of our being. Okay, and that experience of the promise simulates being in love. And something that I don't have any time to talk about, but it's kind of strange that in a love relationship, we can confuse needing love with feeling love for another person. And where I think I'm going to illustrate this in a simple way, maybe you yourself sometimes find yourself wanting to hug another person. Okay. And insofar as you are taking initiative, it looks like you're giving the love, and you might even experience yourself as giving the love to the other person. But actually, if you think about it, sometimes you'll find out that what's going on is you are actually in need of a hug. All right. Probably by saying these, light bulbs are going on. Yeah, actually, it's true. Sometimes when I give a hug, I actually needed a hug. You see that? Okay. And this is just a little example of something that happens on a deeper and more profound level in a counterfeit. All right. We think that we are in love, but in fact, what's happening is that we are in need of love. And for some strange reason, this particular person has evoked these needs and these deprivations. Okay. So I think it can be very difficult to discern within the quality of the love itself, whether it's counterfeit or whether it's real. So we have to use external signs in this case. All right. What those are, and maybe in the Q&A, some of you guys will even have ideas about sort of the signs that this is just a counterfeit. But what's interesting is I find that in counterfeits, usually people on the outside can see it. Your friends will notice, and they'll say, I don't think this is a good relationship for you. Okay. Now, sometimes, of course, this can happen in a true case of falling in love, but it tends to happen more often in counterfeit cases. Okay. There might be other signs that you find that you're not flourishing, that you find that you somehow, there's a powerful emotional experience, but you aren't actually growing in your spiritual life, in your moral life, or whatever it is. You find yourself being diminished. Okay. So you have to look out for those external signs if you can't tell by the quality of the feeling itself. There's another ironic sign of these counterfeit situations, which is breaking up can be particularly difficult. And why is that? Okay, so now remember, in the case of a counterfeit, the wounds will be taking center stage. Remember, the knee-jerk reaction of pain is to seek relief. It's compulsive, all right? On its own, suffering will compulsively seek relief. All right, so if in these counterfeit relationships, which tend to be symbiotic, they tend to be two ways, right? Two people tend to get together with complementary needs, okay? What happens is therefore the relationship itself takes on the compulsive character of the wounds. You see that? Okay, so the relationship itself takes on that compulsive character, a kind of unfree character, and then breaking up can be extremely difficult. Okay, so without saying what the key is, the answer to this is, sometimes it just takes, you have to take violent action, okay? get rid of their phone number off your phone or get rid of their Facebook account, whatever it is, I don't know. But the other way of doing it is something that we should be exercising in all our relationships, that we don't deny the need, we don't deny the wound that needs healing. But what we have to do is get in touch with the self that is more than that wound, that's different from that wound, that's not identical with that wound. Now, the difficulty is when we have very strong wounds, they tend to eclipse that deep, free self that is actually not wounded, all right? We have unresolved emotions that are powerful and take center stage. But I think that if we enter into that suffering, if we allow it to be there, but we say to ourselves, I'm not identical with that suffering, we will find that free self that can get on top of this compulsion, all right? We can sidestep the compulsion, acknowledge that it's there, we can't repress it, all right? But sometimes psychologists say if we observe our emotions, we get on the outside of them. Okay, and I think that's just one small practical key to step back and observe our emotions. Okay, and then we'll be able to, I think, get out of the compulsive situation. All right, and I want to end with just one more complication that can arise in spousal love, which is the following. As Christians, we know that we have within ourselves capax Dei. It's a beautiful phrase that I would love for you guys to learn. Capax is C-A-P-A-X, and Dei is D-E-I, which is God. So capax means space, and Dei is God. We have all been created with a space for God. And I'm pretty convinced that when God creates us, he somehow reveals himself to us and then hides. But by revealing himself to us, he creates in us a thirst for him. Okay, he carves out a space in our being that now, so to speak, is not satisfied without him. It gives rise to a tremendous thirst and a need now in a very positive sense. Okay, and interestingly enough, spousal love happens in a very, very deep place that's very bound up with that capax Dei. Okay, and what can happen in spousal love is we can confuse the spouse as being the one who's supposed to fill that capax Dei. Now, you may have heard of this book called A Severe Mercy by Sheldon and Van Auken. I won't spell that now, but if you just look up A Severe Mercy, it's a very interesting book that speaks about a love relationship that was extremely intense and extremely deep, and the two were atheists. And they, in fact, were supposedly, they said, they were so in love that they didn't want their love to be interfered with the presence of a child. So they promised themselves that when they got married, they wouldn't have any children. So of course, this is a different worldview than we have. But it was interesting because the book is very illustrative. It's very beautiful. They both have conversions. It has a happy ending. But what happened was the wife had a conversion first, and she started recognizing that in the relationship, each had been taking the place of God for the other. And it was extremely painful for him because he didn't find God when she had already found God. And she was already turning her being to God, and he felt that she was turning away from him because she had turned her face, the face that was meant to be turned to God, she had turned to him. Right? She had tried to fill the space, the capax Dei, with her spouse. The book is titled Severe Mercy because she dies. She gets a tremendous illness in her youth, and leaves him. And it's through her death that he then comes to understand that he had also been doing the wrong thing, and that he had this capax Dei, and eventually he became Catholic. And it was a very, very beautiful ending, kind of painful, but very beautiful. And this here too, the source of many troubles within relationships is not keeping apart what you could say is a response to the earthly beloved and what is a response to the heavenly bridegroom. Okay, and without now filling this out, it's very beautiful to think that in a Christian marriage, the two can become bound up with one another. Our love for Christ can be deeply incorporated into our love for our spouse, and should be. It's very beautiful to see that. Okay, and yet sometimes spouses put demands on one another that are inappropriate. And that's why the primary relationship within a marriage has to be with Christ. We have to first come to Him, okay, and then the spousal relationship will fall into place, and we won't be putting illegitimate demands on the other. Okay, so I think this is a good place to stop maybe, and to open the floor to questions. And Jonathan, maybe, I don't know, should I let you be the MC, or how would you like to do this?
Yeah, that would be perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Federica, for the amazing talk. It was quite fantastic. It was really, really good. If you guys would please put a Q in the chat when you have a question, and then we'll call on you in order, and you can ask your question and turn on your mic and video. And yeah, so yeah, thank you, Dr. Federica. That was awesome.
Yes, you're very welcome. Oh, thank you. No questions left, huh? Cleared up everything.
I have a question.
Can you say who you are?
Hi, I'm Laura.
Oh, hi, Laura.
I don't know if you can see me, if I'm up on the
okay.
screen or not.
Hi.
Hi, that was a really great talk. Thank you for that. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about how these counterfeit relationships can also show up in things like friendships, and how you could recognize maybe almost like which side of that you would be on if you feel like you are someone's friend, and then maybe later realize, oh, you didn't really value them in a true friendship, and how are the circumstances different versus a romantic relationship versus a friendship, and that kind of counterfeit relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, so actually, maybe there isn't really a substantial difference between the two. The only difference in the content would be that for whatever reasons, and this is the thing that we can't get to the bottom of, this person has evoked friendship feelings instead of spousal feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Would really be the difference. And so, for example, if a woman might have counterfeit friendship feelings for another woman, it probably wouldn't tend to give rise to spousal feelings. You see that? So that, in a way, that would be kind of the only difference that I can think of there. And I don't know if there was something else in your question.
No, that was just kind of it, and just how it would differ if they would kind of be the same scenario, I guess.
Yeah, and they would have a different quality. That the love that arises would have a different quality. It would be a friendship love rather than a spousal. Mm-hmm. And Laura, in your question actually brings up another issue, which is, this is not to your question, except for that it's really helpful. This step is really helpful for understanding the counterfeit of spousal love that same-sex attraction actually can give rise to. Mm-hmm. So we have to acknowledge that subjectively, same-sex attraction can include emotions that feel spousal. All right, they feel romantic. They have the same quality to them. And I think, how do we say, well, how can you explain that? I thought only a man and a woman feel that for each other. And I think that this whole thing about wounds is the key to explaining that. What you have now is a counterfeit that simulates genuine falling in love. And of course, it requires compassion. And then it also, for whatever reason, flows over into the sexual sphere, which would be a different question, and one that would need to be addressed separately. But we have to acknowledge and recognize that sometimes, even apart from the sexual attraction, there are very often strange emotional attractions, and it's explained, I think, by these counterfeits. And then, of course, you can have it would be the father-son relationship. There might be something in that relationship that would, the wounds underlying that explain why it's with a man. So yeah, so anyway, so thank you for that, that question. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for your answer.
Yeah. Welcome. So
next up we have Jose Quinceno, who's got a question, and then Raquel Suarez.
Okay, so Jose, should I just read your question since you wrote it out? You're welcome. Could you talk about the experience of love that isn't reciprocated, is when someone feels romantic love to somebody who doesn't feel the same towards them? What should I say? I would like to flood out an ocean of compassion to the person who is in that situation. It's a very painful situation. And also very mysterious because God does allow that. And I don't know if your question is, gosh, what to do with that. And maybe I'll just briefly, I'll just briefly talk about it. I know sometimes people answer questions that aren't being asked, but I think I see that in there. So the first thing is to be ready to embrace suffering, and that's the most important thing. And I think especially as Christians, we can say this is the cross that God is putting on our shoulders, and we can unite it to the cross of Jesus. And I think we need to do that. And that helps us to suffer without becoming miserable. So I have a psychologist friend who makes a distinction between suffering and misery. And suffering that is not embraced turns into misery. It's kind of ironic, but suffering that is resisted and fled. Okay. And I think that it's something that I can't put into words, but I think that in the experience of taking up one's cross and going to Christ with it, the person will have answers. Okay, Christ will give the answer as to how to bear that. I would like to say that it's probably the best thing to do. Maybe the next part of my answer is don't feed that love. Don't continuously look at pictures of this person. Don't look at old emails and correspondences and so forth. I think it's important to turn away from the thing that feeds that love, which is the other person and the beauty of that other person. Okay, so I think that's a prudential step that we have to take. But I won't say that guarantees that the love will die. I don't want to pretend that's the case. I think often it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And in that case, God will show us how to incorporate that suffering into our lives in such a way that it becomes fruitful. Okay, it's like the fertilizing soil of the soul, like all suffering is. So I don't know, Jose, whether that is satisfying to you, but that would be my response.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah. Raquel.
Hi, Dr. Federica.
Hi.
I was actually just wondering, what would you think about a circumstance, not where the love isn't reciprocated, but it is reciprocated, but then one of the parties just decides that, like, oh, I don't feel like acknowledging this love during this time. It's inconvenient for me, or I have other things I need to deal with now, and like that kind of situation where it's like they both want to pursue it, but one is kind of like for either because he has some sort of path ahead of him that he wants us to advance before he pursues love. Like, how do you deal with that? It's kind of a complicated question, but.
Yeah. So these are also questions that are prudential, and the details might modify the response to that. You see that? So without knowing all of the circumstances, it's a little bit hard to respond. But maybe a few keys. The first is the person who is being deprived in the situation. So actually there are of course two sides to it, right? But I think you're talking about the one who is being deprived. And the first thing is never to move into anger, to always just remain in the place of the pain, because anger doesn't solve the pain anyway. It just complicates things. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is, well, it could be that the other person is being unjust and unfair, or you could say unfaithful to himself or herself, or unfaithful to the gift that God is giving. And all of that has to be discerned. And the person who is being deprived can go to the other and say, you have acknowledged that this is a gift that's being given to both of us. So now live up to it. And it's possible that there's selfishness on the part of the other. It's possible that there's a lack of understanding, a lack of courage, fear. And I think all of those things can be simply straightforwardly addressed. And there might be a struggle, but that will contribute to the relationship if the two enter into that struggle together. So I hope that helps, Raquel.
Yes, thank you.
All right, next we have Anastasia and myself.
So I have a question very similar to Raquel's, and that is, let's say that there is, there's a man and a woman, and it's at the beginning, they receive the gift of love, and they do acknowledge that they've got this special gift, but they aren't really ready to go into the courtship stage yet, the dating stage yet. Is there a place in there for some period of growth, and what would that look like if it didn't involve courting?
You mean, excuse me, can you clarify, is there a period of growth of the relationship itself?
Yes, or of the friendship in between acknowledging, things of love and actually pursuing a courtship.
Okay. Wow, this might be above my pay grade. So, gosh, and here again, there might. So you're saying assume that the couple has correctly discerned that they're not meant to get together. Is that right, Anastasia?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm supposed to assume that they have correctly discerned that they're not meant to enter into a courtship. Is that correct?
I mean, I suppose I hadn't thought that far, but I do have a particular example in mind of younger sister in particular, and
okay, so it's difficult.
It doesn't seem like the right time for her right now. So.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah. Oh, there you are. I didn't see you. It's nice to see you. Yeah. So that is a little bit difficult because the gift of falling in love has a kind of trajectory to it. It has a fire that spends itself, and that's why also, all things being equal, okay, I know there can always be exceptions. I don't recommend long courtships because there's a natural rhythm to being in love and courtship, which is meant to progress into marriage. And if it goes on for 5 years or whatever, some things can go wrong. So that's my initial answer is, if it's at all possible for them to enter into the courtship soon, that would be the best thing. And if it's not, then I think once you have discerned that this is where I'm meant to be. Now, I don't know if your sister has a faith. I'm just going to assume that, because I think you all probably do have the faith. It makes all the difference in the world to say, this is God's plan, and that means everything is going to be okay. And so then the requirement would be to discern, okay, sometimes people say we'll just be friends, and it doesn't work if they're with each other all the time. They find that they're in fact being thrown into a courtship relationship, but they're not being honest about it. So I think the key thing would be to be very honest about it. If they find that they can't avoid that, but they're yet not meant to date and they can't discern marriage, I think that they should probably cut off contact with one another and trust that God in a sense, take that love, give it into the safekeeping of God's heart, and say, when it's time, I trust that you will instill that love or reawaken it in us, even if now there is some sense in which the two should, I think, put a veil over it and sort of remove themselves from contact with one another. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, good. You're welcome. So Jonathan.
All right, so I think my question might be a little bit simple. So we've been talking about counterfeits quite a bit. And so let's say, is it possible for a relationship to be true, and then counterfeits arise later in the relationship? Or do counterfeits always present themselves at the beginning, or at least throughout? Can a relationship start without counterfeits and then take them on later on?
How late?
I don't know. I guess for the example state, let's just imagine that two people fall in love, and let's say a year into it, there seems to be the realization of the counterfeit comes in. Is basically I'm asking, is the counterfeit always present, or is that something, if something arises, is that just something that people need to suffer through and discern better?
Okay. Okay, good. So I thought you meant like, after they're married or something. and that's impossible, you guys. Never fear. You're being, you have put yourself in a situation where God will give you love. When if, as long as you're cooperating, God will give you the love. Okay, but in this case, yeah, I would say yes, it probably can happen. And then the question is, I mean, then you have, I hadn't thought about that case, but let's say there was a genuine falling in love. So here's the thing: God gives falling in love for free, and boy, people in that stage are really carried, and it's a very beautiful gift. But they can block it. So I don't think they can do much to increase it. God does that, but they can block it. And it could be that troubles in the relationship are killing the genuine in loveness. And then is it possible that counterfeit attachments arise? I think probably that's the case. That probably can, yeah. And yeah, I guess you just have to be alert. It sounds like a rather unusual situation, but I guess it could happen. Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes people also just, say they think that they're kind of starting to be in love, and they start a relationship. And if they might realize that it's not meant to be continued. And sometimes if they don't break it off soon enough, counterfeits begin to arise too. So that's the other thing. Yeah. I think we have Taylor, you're up next.
Hi, Dr. Federica. Thank you for your talk. It was really beautiful. So my question, is there a way to determine in sort of the dating relationship whether that is the right relationship, if one person feels very consistently committed to that relationship and sure about it, but the other person struggles? Sometimes they feel very strongly about it, and then other times they're doubting or wanting to push it away. Is that a definitive sign that it's not the right relationship, or is that something that looks more like, you need to sort of discern more or try to work through it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And unfortunately, there's no one answer to it. And it can be hard, because you know what? Because of our wounds, there can be so many fears triggered in connection with love. And the love can be genuine. It can be really God. It can even be calling two people in marriage. And the process of getting there can be very difficult because of fear, because of wounds, because of inability to commit because you don't trust enough and things like that. So you would almost have to look at the particular situation. And it is hard. And I will say this: I think Christians are very lucky, because entrust it to God, entrust the situation to God, so that even if the two are subjectively don't have a clear light on in their minds as to what they should do, God directs the outcome. Even if the step is, let's say the step of breaking up eventually is taken in some darkness, I'm not sure, I just have to do something, this can't go on. Then you can be sure that God is arranging it. And we don't always have to see if we put ourselves in God's hands. So that's just a very practical tip. But it would take some discernment. And it's a very good question. It's a very good question. I don't know if that was particularly helpful, but
it was. Thank you.
Yeah. So Gregory, can a counterfeit love in a relationship become spousal? There we go. So we kind of have the opposite of Jonathan's question. And yes, I think yes, for sure. I'm trying to think. I'm thinking of something in literature where that was the case. And I can't think of it right now, but that's a neat question. I think it can. Yeah, God can all at once pierce through the neediness, the woundedness that's making itself felt, and reveal the beauty to the soul of the wounded and needy person. and so the beauty flashes up in their soul and they fall in genuine love. So that's kind of neat. Yeah, Annalise?
Hi, Dr. Federica. My question was regarding, like, you're talking about the Kapok and how a person can make, like, their significant other, like, fill that space. And I was wondering, like, what are the signs that that is happening? Or, like, are there any indicators that you could be like, oh, this is what's going on?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I wish you hadn't asked that question, except it's so important that it's good that you did. Okay, do you know how I think you can become aware that that's happening? This is going to sound kind of funny, but in the process of okay, let me start over. So when you enter into a relationship, a romantic relationship, I'll call it, it becomes all the more important for God to become the center of your life. If you haven't had a spiritual life before your courtship, make sure you get a spiritual life during your courtship. Because I think, Annalise, that it's kind of funny, but the fact that you are seeking the wrong thing from your significant other reveals itself in the experience of union with God. That I think what will happen is you will experience yourself achieving a kind of, whatever it is, a peace, that you'll find that a certain knee-jerk neediness will fall away as you enter into the relationship with Christ. And so oddly enough, it will manifest itself. One way that it will manifest itself is as you're already correcting the problem. Okay, so that's I think one way. And that's why maybe it's impossible to discern in any concrete. I have to think about that, Annalise. Is it possible to actually know directly that we're doing that to the significant other? It may not be possible. It may just be something that we have to be managing all the time without knowing that we're managing it by remaining close to Christ. But thank you for that question, and I'll have to think about it. And if I have more to say, then I'll drop you a line.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Mary.
Hi, Dr. Federica. Thank you for your talk tonight. My question is a very particular question. If two people are in a relationship and then they break up and they're in a close community and they inevitably see one another every day, that's obviously kind of hard for both people to heal and grow from the relationship. Mm-hmm. So how would you, I guess, speak to that that particular situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's again a very, very concrete one, a very particular one. Oh gosh, Mary, you know, I don't actually have an answer to that. My answer, I think, is going, I hope it's not a non-answer, but I can tell you what I would do in that situation is plant myself very firmly in the fact that this is God's providence for me and for this other person. And I think that the usefulness of my answer will only become clear to somebody who actually does that. I think it's hard to understand in the abstract. But if, I'm going to use the words from a Novena that I love, I think if you say, if you surrender this situation to God and ask Him to take care of it, okay, there it is. Now I'm giving a little more robust answer. If you surrender the situation to God and say He has to take care of it because there is no way that you can take care of it, He is going to give a solution. And you don't know what it is. It might be that suddenly you never see the other person. He can do that. He's God. It might be that suddenly the emotional difficulty that you have is a suffering that is completely manageable. You feel that it's there, but you're able to function. I think the situation you're talking about is people can find themselves unable to function and manage. And I think that I think there is no concrete answer other than really surrender. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe somebody else has more wisdom on this, but in my experience, because you can have that situation not only in sort of broken up relationships, you can have it also in the case of other tensions that have arisen. And I think that God has to give the answer, and he will. If these two persons surrender themselves to Jesus, which means really letting go, I think he will do it. Okay, I'm glad that I'm speaking at a Catholic university right now. And this isn't just blowing hot air. This is a very concrete answer. Yeah.
Thank
so,
you. Dr.
Yes, you're welcome. So Fiddler on the Roof. Oh, that's nice. Middlemarch has an example of it too. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. And, I wanted to mention arranged marriages too. They can turn into real love if there's a mutual respect. Good. So so Michael, it's your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Federica, for your talk.
Oh, you're welcome.
What your opinion might be on if a person, how can a person kind of tell if they are feeling a desire of love towards another person, but how can they kind of tell if it is a true love of the person versus a more selfish love for that healing or that past hurt? And then also how to not mirror that hurt, say, onto someone if they fall in love or desire a relationship later on.
Can you ask the last question again?
So assuming that a person, say, has experienced some hurt in the past, how can they kind of discern whether they're mirroring that onto the other person versus desiring the other person for a true reason?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's why. So you're basically saying how do we discern the difference between a counterfeit and a genuine case of falling in love? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So so part of the problem is because it's a counterfeit, it's a good imitation, and by looking directly at it, it can be hard. So very often, what we have to do is we have to look at external signs, and almost inevitably there will be things that don't go along with a genuine love relationship. Okay. So for example, it might be the inability to let the other person have other friendships. For example, if you find that you are jealous of your significant other, pretty good sign that there's a counterfeit going on. Jealousy is a pretty good. Now, of course, jealousy can coexist with genuine falling in love, but if sometimes it's a very good sign of a counterfeit. Another one would be that there could be things happening in you through this relationship where you are finding yourself obsessed maybe with the other, obsessed with the relationship issues, very often a sign of a counterfeit. But it's a good question to, it would be great if somebody gave a counterfeit manual and maybe one of these days I'll put one together. You guys can email me and if you can think of things that reveal counterfeits. So, but that jealousy is a very big one. The inability to let the significant other be free, the inability to function without them in their presence. Okay, I know this sounds a little bit ironic because there's a way in which when you're genuinely in love, you don't know yourself except for in the presence of the other, so to speak. But the funny thing is, in genuine love, a real freedom can coexist with that fulfillment in the other. You're able to let them be who they are. You're able to let go of them if you need to. Okay, that's also, you have examples in literature where it's a sure sign if you can't let the other go, you're being possessive of them. So little things like that. It's probably the best I can do now. It's a good question.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see. Okay, looks like one more, Teresa.
Hi, Dr. Federica.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Oh,
thank
gosh.
you so much for your talk.
You're welcome.
I had a quick question. What would a healthy, what's a healthy balance of independency and dependency, in a relationship? How would you describe that? What would that look like in a relationship, being independent, finding that fulfillment in God, but also that dependency of also looking to your significant other for that shoulder to lean on? So how would you describe the dependency and independence, like a good, healthy balance in a relationship? Like, what would that look like?
Okay, so gosh, it's a big question. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it justice, but I will say a little bit, a few things that come to mind. So first of all, keep in mind that there are two kinds of. Wait, let me just think for a second. Hold on. I see a couple forks in the road, and I have to think of which one to take. Okay, I would say this. So your question is, so I actually think that there were two things stirred into your question that maybe should be kept separate. There's no healthy way to depend on the other as if they were God, okay? That's right. So maybe you're asking, when, it's kind of similar to Annalise's question, how do I know when my dependence on the other is shifting into depending on them as if they were God? I think that's kind of what you're asking.
Yes,
And,
that is kind of in a way. Yeah, just kind of like drawing that line of that, like kind of like that boundary of also like understanding, communicating with the person of that.
Yeah. So I would say this, okay, again, in part, I'll answer, make sure that you make your relationship with Christ the foundation of your life. Always go to him, okay? And it's very beautiful. You know that in the rite of marriage in Eastern rites, they're given a cross, and each one is given to one another as the other's cross. And that cross is supposed to be at the center of the family home, and married couples always go to the crucifix first when they have a problem, and that's kind of interesting to me. But the other thing is, I would say that when it comes to leaning on the other person, if the other person is there for us, I'm not sure there has to be a limitation. In other words, if the other person is there ready to receive all our burdens, we should go to them. Now, keep in mind, though, there's a difference between going to them in this compulsive way, okay, and going to them, asking them, will they bear this burden with us? Okay, and so I would say that the balance isn't between too much and too little dependence. The question is, how do I get this dependency right? So where I go to the other, and if it's the kind of, God sometimes grants us spouses that can bear all of our burdens with us, then feel free, I think, to go, but never to move into demanding and never moving into anger if the spouse isn't able to. I think that's the best probably that I can do, Teresa. I hope that helps a little. No, that actually like helped a lot. That last part like answered the question perfectly. Thank you so much. Oh, good. All right. So Jonathan,
All right. I think that wraps everything up. Thank you so much, Dr. Federica, for the wonderful talk and all of the great answers to the questions. I should give you a round of applause. I can clap just by myself, but it was very, very good. So thank you so much for being willing to come on and speak to all of us, even though it's virtual. And yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. So thank you.
Oh, well, you're so welcome. I just want to thank all of you guys for being here, and it's kind of funny because the computer definitely puts a barrier between people, but on the other hand, I have felt a lot of love since we went online, and I think that's God kind of thumbing his nose at computers and saying, I can deal with this. So I just want to thank you all so much for being here, and and for sending your love over the computer, and I send mine back. So, and I wish you all very well. Bye for now.